Hi, welcome to this introduction to AdaCAD. This introduction is intended for first-time users. It's going to show you how to get started with this program, what things you have access to on the interface, and how to use it. So when you load AdaCAD, you're going to see this pop-up that says, where would you like to begin? So for today, and maybe as you're learning, you might want to just load an example. In the future, you can load a file you've saved or even start with an image or an empty draft. But we're going to load this introduction example. And in this video, I'm actually going to show you how we make this example. So what we have here are a series of operations, and these operations are connected together to kind of grow different draft structures. And while this looks really confusing as I scroll around, let's go ahead and find our first helper, which is view, and we can go ahead and unzoom. And this triangle here, or rectangle, shows you where you're looking on the screen. So let's move this back over here. Okay, so this is our file. And what we're doing here is we're combining two different structures, a basket and a twill. And then we're making a two-layer fabric from that and tiling that pattern. And so one of the interesting things here is when you connect an operation to another operation, it creates a kind of stream where at the end of the stream it grows some kind of output. And it's made to be really playful. So if I change something way up here at the top of the stream, it'll have ripple down effects through the whole program. And let's say I change something down here, like the shift of the given draft, it'll change it as well. So the idea here is that you can kind of playfully discover different kinds of structures, maybe on accident and maybe a little bit more intentionally. All right, so let's go ahead and get started with a new file. So what we're going to do here is we're going to clear our whole screen and start fresh. All right, so this is our blank slate. If you wanted to load in a new file, you could just click this open and you could load in an old AdaCAD file if you'd like. But what we're going to do here is start totally from scratch. So one way you can do that is to start with an operation. And this operations panel shows you every possible operation that AdaCAD supports. And if you scroll over it, it'll tell you a little bit more about what that operation does. And if you're really stuck, you can click this question mark. It'll also tell you a little bit more information about what it does and all the parameters. If you're a geek, you might even like to look at the code, although it's fairly difficult to read. Okay, so we added a twill operation. Another way you might want to create a starting draft is just to draw one manually. And so here we used our marquee tool to make a blank rectangle, and then we hit edit. And we can come in and just, draw our draft. I can't say this is a very awkward satine, manually. And then you can come in here and you can adjust the material colors. You kind of have free reign to start from scratch here. One of the things that I like to do is just define repeats. So if I want my wefts to always repeat pink and black, I can just apply this and it'll repeat them pink and black. And we can also flip the view. Let's actually maybe give us a little bit of a better structure. And if you want to view what the individual yarns are doing, it's a little bit buggy, but it works okay. You can go ahead and flip to the yarn view and see the paths of each individual yarn. Okay, so that's how we would create it in a more traditional drafting style. If you're more used to using things like a shaft loom, you can come down here in the loom settings and switch to shaft loom and then close it. And when you open it, you'll see that you actually have the different threading, tie-ups, and treadling that you can design with. And it'll automatically generate those from whatever's in your draft. Or if you're drawing in these, we can just draw here, it'll automatically populate the drawdown. So again, not a very great draft, but just to kind of show you what it does. All right, most of the features we're going to be looking at today really just require the kind of jacquard style. So I'm going to switch back to that. All right. Another feature we have here is if you want to, you can add in different materials to this set. By default, all the warps are set to black and all the wefts are set to white. But one thing we can do is actually change the color of the materials. And you see that actually changes on the screen in real time. Save. Or you can actually go ahead and add in a new material. So let's maybe make a red. And we'll call this red. Add this material. So now when we go to add materials, we have more we can choose from, and I can just click through these different materials and add them. Okay, the final way we can start drafting is by drawing shapes. And what shapes does is it allows you to draw these more controlled regions that maybe you fill with stitches later. So here we actually have a circle. And if I duplicate the circle and scroll one over the other, we actually see it knock out. And that's because when I went in here, I'm using a reversing ink. Okay, so the idea here too is let's go ahead and add another operation, a rectangle. Let's make that rectangle the same size as my circle, 32, 32. And let's go ahead. Now I'm going to actually copy it out of this with duplicate. And then if I scroll over, you can see it actually scrolls that twill over the circle. So that's another way that you can go about drafting. But I'm going to go back to the structure that we set up in the original example. So we started with a twill, we put it into a rectangle, and then we also started with a basket weave. I'll actually leave these operations open. And I like actually porting all the structures into rectangles so they're kind of a standard size. So that way if I change the structure, the basket weave, and this, they kind of will always end up in drafts that are the same size. Now, one of the things that I like to do here is use these binary kind of mathematical operations to perform different operations. So for instance, we can do knockout. Let's also try overlay and see what these do. To connect these to an operation, I click the output and then I click the input of the next operation. And here I'll do this again. And now what we have is this kind of basket weave that's been knocked out of a rectangle, of a twill. And again, we can kind of play with our parameters. If our desired function was overlay, we could do an overlay, and this just overlays the twill on top of the rectangle. And so you could then maybe play with your basket weave to maybe get a little bit more of that overlay region showing. Okay, so that's the different kind of mathematical operators we can do. AdaCAD also helps you with different kind of structural operations. So for instance, if we wanted to create two variations of this, let's say we want a two-layered fabric and we want the top layer to be this draft we're looking at now, but maybe it's shifted, right? And a shift means that we alternate kind of where the pattern sits relative to the frame. And let's say on the other one, we actually want to invert it. So if this is the bottom layer, so we have the kind of pattern facing outward. If I wanted to create a two-layer fabric with this draft represented on the top and this on the bottom, I could go in and just go ahead. Sometimes when I'm feeling lazy, I just write in layer and it brings it up. And this is my two-layer version. Okay, so when I actually, if I would hand weave this, this would end up in a two-layer fabric. So one of the things, if you are a floor loom weaver, you can use this floor loom operation and it'll generate you the tie-up threading and treadling. Okay, I'm going to delete those. So this is a really interesting way just to see the structure. It also does some nice things when it comes to color. If we want to remove a connection, we can use these little X's on top. Since you might lose track of what's connected to what, you can give everything a unique name. So we can call this inverted pattern, and we can call this shifted pattern. And now you can see that if I want to get rid of the shifted pattern, I could just hit the X. So what I'm going to use here is actually the apply materials. And I'm going to copy it, and I'll apply materials to the bottom as well. So let's say we want the top layer to be one color and the bottom layer to be another color. So what I would do then is I'd come in and just make a really small little draft. And the draft should be the size of the repeats. So if I only want one color on the warp, I can just delete it to have one color. And I'll make the warp this kind of green. And then I'm going to make the weft this, ooh, that's a little Christmassy. I'm gonna make the weft black. Okay, so now when I plug that in, you see the green and black. Okay, so I'll copy this and I'll put it over here. And let's say I'm going to make the bottom red and white. Okay, I go ahead and port it in. And so now I have my green draft and my red draft. And you'll see that when I layer them, it actually keeps track of those colors. Okay, so I can open it up and I can see, how I would have to do the threading. But I can also see that they are assigned to different systems. So the A system represents our top layer and the B system represents our bottom layer. And so that kind of allows you to view the system separately. So if you only want to see what's happening on the top layer, you can go ahead and just hide the B layer. If you want to see what's happening on the bottom layer, you can go hide the A layer. If you want to see what the back looks like, you can flip it. Or if you want to see what the actual yarns are doing, you can view them that way. So there we go. That's what the back of our fabric will look like. And this is what the front of our fabric will look like. Okay, so that's the gist of AdaCAD. We have some other features that you're welcome just to play around with, see how it works for you. It does run in the browser, and sometimes you accidentally hit the back button or something happens. So one way that you can kind of ensure your files won't be lost is to create an account. So we have this sign in button. Right now we only support signing in with Google, but if you go ahead and do that, it'll sign you in. And now it'll save this file for me.